The Supremes were more than just a girl group. They were a music revolution. With hit after hit, they ruled the charts and helped put Motown on the map. But behind the fame was a story few truly know. Friendships shattered, personal struggles hidden from the spotlight, fame that lifted them up, only to leave some of them behind. What really happened to the original members? How did success affect their friendships, their lives, and their legacies? In this video, we'll look at the Supremes then and now, uncovering the triumphs, tragedies, and twists that shaped their journey from 1959 to 2025. Let's get into it. How the Supremes changed music. In Detroit, Michigan in 1958, two 15-year-old girls, Florence Ballard and Mary Wilson, met at a local talent show. They quickly bonded over their shared love of singing, a passion that would soon shape music history. Not long after, Ballard was introduced to Paul Williams and Eddie Kendricks, members of a rising doo-wop group called The Primes, a group that would later evolve into the legendary Temptations. Williams' girlfriend, Betty McGlown, was also a singer. The group's manager, Milton Jenkins, saw an opportunity. He envisioned a female counterpart to the Primes, a sister group called the Primettes, who could open for them at live shows. He asked Ballard to form the group with McGlown. Ballard then brought in her friend, Mary Wilson, and Wilson invited her classmate Diana Ross to join. Some say Paul Williams also had a hand in recruiting Ross. And just like that, the Primettes were born. Florence Ballard, Mary Wilson, Diana Ross, and Betty McGlown. Jenkins wasted no time lining up performances. The Primettes began singing at social clubs, talent shows, and sock hops, informal teen dances where shoes had to be removed to protect the floors. Covering hits by Ray Charles, the Drifters, and others, they built a loyal local following. Unlike many acts of the time, the Primettes always sang live. To strengthen their sound, Jenkins brought in a talented young guitarist named Marvin Tarplin to back them. In early 1960, after winning a local talent competition, Diana Ross set her sights higher. She wanted the group to record professionally. She reached out to an old friend and former neighbor, William "Smokey" Robinson, who had strong ties to a young and growing label, Motown Records. Ross asked Robinson if he could help the group land an audition. He agreed, but with one condition. Marvin Tarplin, their guitarist, would have to join the Miracles, Smokey's own group, for their upcoming tour. Ross said yes, and in return, Robinson arranged an audition for the Primettes with Berry Gordy, Motown's founder. At the audition, the girls sang a cappella. Gordy was impressed by their harmonies and raw talent. Still, he felt they were too young and inexperienced for a record deal and told them to come back after finishing high school. Though disappointed, the girls didn't give up. Instead, they recorded a single with a small local label called Lupine Records, run by Robert West, who essentially created the label for them. The song was called Tears of Sorrow, but it failed to make waves. Not long after, Betty McGlown left the group to focus on her upcoming marriage. She was replaced by Barbara Martin, though Martin's participation was limited. Her parents prioritized school over singing and often wouldn't allow her to rehearse. Florence Ballard's parents had similar concerns, so throughout much of 1960, it was mostly Mary Wilson and Diana Ross keeping the group going. They spent a lot of time around the Motown studio, sometimes doing background vocals for artists like Mabel John, and even clapping hands on early Marvin Gaye tracks. By then, Smokey Robinson had become vice president of Motown, and he let the girls record some of his songs in the studio, keeping their dream alive, even if a record deal was still just out of reach. In January 1961, Berry Gordy finally agreed to sign the Primettes to Motown Records, but there was one condition: they had to change their name. Gordy handed them a list of possible alternatives, and it was Florence Ballard who picked the one that would make history: the Supremes. Neither Mary Wilson nor Diana Ross were particularly fond of the name, but Gordy loved it. And since he was now backing their music, his vote was the one that counted. So on January 15, 1961, the group officially became the Supremes. But success didn't happen overnight. That April, Motown began releasing their first singles. I Want a Guy came first, but it didn't take off. Their follow-up, Buttered Popcorn, also failed to make an impact. By 1962, frustration had started to set in. The Supremes hadn't scored a hit, and some people at Motown jokingly called them the no-hit Supremes. Still, the group refused to give up. They stayed busy at the label, doing anything they could, from background vocals to clapping on other artists' tracks. That same year, they released Your Heart Belongs to Me and Let Me Go the Right Way. Both singles made it to the Billboard Hot 100, but didn't crack the top. The setbacks took a toll. Barbara Martin, who had joined the group the previous year, quietly left in 1962 to start a family. Meanwhile, Diana Ross took a part-time job working in the cafeteria at Hudson's department store to help make ends meet. Still, Ballard, Wilson, and Ross pressed on, determined to find their sound. All three took turns singing lead. Ballard leaned into soul. Wilson preferred soft ballads. Ross had a natural fit for pop. Much of their early material came from Berry Gordy himself or from Smokey Robinson, who continued to believe in their potential. Their first full-length album, Meet the Supremes, was released on December 9, 1962. Although it later gained attention, at the time it barely made a ripple. Then came the turning point. In 1963, Motown released 3 more Supremes singles, but real momentum didn't build until the label's powerhouse songwriting trio, Holland Dozier Holland, stepped in. The team of Lamont Dozier and brothers Brian and Eddie Holland began crafting songs specifically for the group. These writers didn't just create hits, they helped define the Motown sound of the decade. Their first offering for the Supremes, When the Love Light Starts Shining Through His Eyes, was released on Halloween 1963. It was only a modest hit, but it was the group's biggest success to date, and a clear sign that something was finally clicking. Not long after, Berry Gordy made a pivotal decision. He named Diana Ross the official lead singer of the group. 1964 was the year everything changed for the Supremes. It didn't start with fireworks. Their single, Run, 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 released on February 7th, didn't make much noise. It failed to chart as a hit. But a few months later, everything shifted. On June 17th, Motown released Where Did Our Love Go? And it exploded onto the scene. It became their first #1 hit on the Billboard Hot 100 and the first of 5 consecutive chart toppers. What followed was an incredible run. Baby Love, Come See About Me, Stop, In the Name of Love, and Back in My Arms Again. Each one hit #1. And it wasn't just America that was falling in love with their sound. Baby Love made history as the first song by an all-female group to reach #1 in the United Kingdom. Virtually overnight, the Supremes were everywhere, on radio, TV, and magazine covers. Their music was being played almost as often as the Beatles. They joined Dick Clark's American Bandstand Caravan of Stars, starting the tour as just one act on the lineup. But by the end of the tour, they were the headliners. Then came the album that changed everything. On August 31st, 1964, Motown released Where Did Our Love Go?, the group's second studio album. It made history, becoming the first album by any musical group to feature 3 #1 singles, according to Billboard magazine. The album stayed on the charts for 89 weeks and became the highest-ranking album ever released by an all-female group up to that point. More than just a hit, Where Did Our Love Go? Helped launch the Motown sound into the mainstream. The momentum didn't stop there. On October 16th, Motown released the group's third studio album, A Bit of Liverpool, a nod to the British invasion and the Beatles, with a few Liverpool-inspired covers. That same month, the Supremes had 3 albums charting simultaneously. Also in October, they took the stage at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium for a massive 2-day event, the TAMI Show, short for Teenage Awards Music International, or Teenage Music International, depending on who you ask. It was loud, electric, and packed with screaming teens. When the concert film of the show was released on December 29th, it pushed their stardom even higher. And when the Supremes took the stage, they didn't just sing, they made a statement. Unlike many African American acts before them, they embraced a high glamour image, proudly celebrating their femininity. They wore flawless makeup, elegant gowns, and elaborate wigs, a look that became iconic. Their stage presence was also elevated by choreographer Charlie Atkins, who helped design movements that were both graceful and precise, a far cry from the simple routines of their early days. By the end of 1964, the Supremes were no longer just rising stars. They were superstars, and nothing about music, style, or Motown would ever be the same again. The Supremes weren't afraid to take risks. In fact, 1965 proved just how versatile and busy they could be. And on February 22, 1965, Motown released their 4th studio album, The Supremes Sing Country, Western, and Pop. It was a bold move, a full covers album where the trio stepped outside their Motown roots to try their hand at country and pop standards. It may have raised some eyebrows, but it showed just how far the group was willing to stretch creatively. Less than 2 months later, on April 12th, they were back with another release. We Remember Sam Cooke, a heartfelt tribute to the soul legend who had died just a few months earlier. The album honored his legacy with covers of some of his most beloved songs. Yes, 1965 was a whirlwind year for the Supremes. On July 23rd, they dropped more hits by the Supremes, their 6th studio album. Some of the tracks had already been released as singles, but the album still spent an impressive 37 weeks on the Billboard charts. One notable track from the album was Nothing But Heartaches. Though it broke their streak of consecutive #1 hits, it still sold over 1 million copies, proving that even a miss for the Supremes was still a major success. As if 3 albums weren't enough, Motown released a 4th that year, Merry Christmas, which came out on November 1st. Featuring classic holiday songs, it was the Supremes' 7th studio album, and a reminder of just how prolific they had become. Beyond the studio, they were also expanding their brand, making a cameo in the beach party film Beach Ball, endorsing products, and even launching their own line of bread. Yes, bread. Despite the packed recording schedule, the Supremes continued performing non-stop. On July 29, 1965, they headlined the iconic Copacabana nightclub in New York City, a major milestone for any artist. They also embarked on international tours and quickly became global stars. On television, they were breaking barriers too, becoming one of the first African-American acts to appear regularly on national shows like The Ed Sullivan Show, Hullabaloo, The Della Reese Show, and The Hollywood Palace. Their momentum carried into 1966 without missing a beat. On February 18th, Motown released I Hear a Symphony, their 8th studio album, which featured 2 major hits, My World is Empty Without You, and the title track, I Hear a Symphony, which once again hit #1. That summer, on August 25th, came their 9th studio album, The Supremes A Go-Go. It made history, becoming the first album by an all-female group to top the Billboard 200 chart in the United States. It featured hits like Love is Like an Itching in My Heart and You Can't Hurry Love, the latter of which also climbed straight to the top of the charts. Then, on October 12th, they did it again with You Keep Me Hanging On, another #1 smash. Even as the Supremes continued to dominate the charts, trouble was brewing, both within the group and inside the walls of Motown. Tensions were rising behind the scenes. Many other Motown artists believed Berry Gordy was giving too much attention to the Supremes, and in particular, to Diana Ross. That belief wasn't entirely unfounded. By this time, Ross and Gordy had begun a romantic relationship, one that would last for years and eventually result in a child, though the two never married. Regardless of their personal ties, it was clear that Ross was receiving special treatment, and that favoritism began to disrupt the group's balance. Rumors swirled that Gordy wanted Ross to leave the Supremes and launch a solo career. His supposed plan included replacing her with singer Barbara Randolph. Though that move never came to pass, he did officially rebrand the group as the Supremes with Diana Ross, a move he said was for marketing, but one that only deepened the divide. Florence Ballard didn't stay quiet about it. She was outspoken in her belief that Motown had damaged the group dynamic by pushing Ross into the spotlight. Caught in the middle was Mary Wilson, who often found herself playing peacekeeper between Ballard and Ross, doing her best to stay neutral and hold the group together. But Ballard was struggling. The pressure, the shift in attention, and personal demons led her into a deep depression. She began self-medicating with alcohol, which caused her to miss important performances and recording sessions. At least once, when she failed to show up, Gordy brought in Marlene Barrow of the Andantes to stand in for her on stage. Despite the behind-the-scenes turmoil, the Supremes continued to release hit after hit during the early months of 1967. Songs like Love Is Here and Now You Are Gone, Reflections, and The Happening kept them at the top of the charts. The Happening would ultimately mark the final #1 hit written for the group by the legendary songwriting team Holland Dozier Holland. Shortly after, the trio left Motown to form their own labels, closing a historic chapter. Before their departure, Motown released one final tribute to their work. The Supremes sing Holland Dozier Holland, the group's 10th studio album, released on January 23, 1967. In April 1967, after Florence Ballard repeatedly missed rehearsals, Berry Gordy made a difficult decision. He brought in Cindy Birdsong, formerly of Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells, as her replacement. However, Ballard wasn't gone just yet. She briefly returned around the time Motown released the group's 11th studio album, The Supremes Sing Rodgers and Hart, on May 22, 1967. But the writing was on the wall. The following month, in June, Gordy made another branding move, this time officially renaming the group The Supremes with Diana Ross. It was clear who the focus was now. Then, on July 1st, during a performance at the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas, Ballard arrived intoxicated. Frustrated and fed up, Gordy fired her on the spot. Cindy Birdsong, who had already been waiting in the wings, became her permanent replacement. Ballard's life after the Supremes was marked by a series of painful ups and downs. She tried to launch a solo career, but it never took off. Struggling with addiction, depression, and financial hardship, her health declined. In February 1976, she died from a heart attack at just 32 years old. By the end of 1967, the Supremes were still charting hits, like In and Out of Love. But behind the scenes, the original group was no more. Ballard was gone, and the powerhouse songwriting team of Holland Dozier Holland, responsible for many of their biggest hits, had also left Motown to start their own labels. Still, the show went on. On March 25, 1968, Motown released the group's 12th studio album, Reflections, featuring the single Forever Came Today. Years later, the Jackson 5 would reimagine that track as a disco hit. That summer, on August 26th, they released their 13th studio album, Diana Ross and the Supremes Sing and Perform Funny Girl. The album was a tribute to the Broadway musical made famous by Barbra Streisand. To coincide with a major television special, Motown brought together its two biggest acts, the Supremes and the Temptations, for a collaborative album. The result, Diana Ross and the Supremes Join the Temptations, was released on November 8, 1968, becoming the group's 14th studio album and peaking at #2 on the Billboard 200. Amazingly, just 5 days later, on November 13th, Motown released their 15th album, Love Child. It was the first Supremes album without any Holland Dozier Holland songs, but it didn't matter. The title track, Love Child became a #1 hit, and the album received strong praise from critics. As the late 1960s wore on, Diana Ross and the Supremes remained a fixture on television and continued to perform regularly. But behind the polished appearances, it was clear that Ross was slowly drifting away from the group. The chemistry on stage wasn't what it once was, and backstage, the tension hadn't gone away. By 1969, Berry Gordy and Motown were already laying the groundwork for Ross's solo career. On May 26, 1969, Motown released the group's 16th studio album, Let the Sunshine In. Surprisingly, 2 tracks on the album still featured vocals from Florence Ballard, a quiet reminder of how much had changed. The album also included 3 singles, I'm Livin' in Shame, The Composer, and No Matter What Sign You Are. Later that year, the Supremes reunited once again with The Temptations for a second collaborative album titled Together, released on September 23, 1969. Technically, it marked their 17th studio album, but it was their next release, Cream of the Crop, that would become a turning point. Released on November 3, 1969, it was the group's 18th album and the final studio release to feature Diana Ross as lead singer. It included one last massive hit, Someday We'll Be Together, which climbed to #1 on the charts and symbolically closed the Ross era. The song also served as her farewell. On January 14, 1970, during a live performance at the Frontier Hotel in Las Vegas, Ross sang Someday We'll Be Together, one final time as a Supreme. That night, she publicly introduced her replacement, Jean Terrell, a singer Gordy had discovered in a Miami nightclub a few years earlier. After that, Diana Ross officially launched her solo career, quickly rising to superstar status in the 1970s with a string of chart-topping records and acclaimed film roles. Meanwhile, the Supremes continued on, now performing simply as The Supremes, with only Mary Wilson remaining from the original lineup. Motown released their 19th studio album, Right On April 26, 1970. It was the first to feature Jean Terrell, and despite Ross's departure, the album performed well. It included the hits Up the Ladder to the Roof and Everybody's Got the Right to Love. Later that year, the group teamed up with the Four Tops for another collaborative effort, The Magnificent Seven, released in September 1970. It marked the Supremes' 20th studio album. By October 1970, the Supremes showed no signs of slowing down. That month, Motown released their 21st studio album, New Ways But Love Stays, which featured what would become their most successful single of the Jean Terrell era, Stoned Love. A soulful anthem with a touch of psychedelia, it perfectly captured the early 70s sound and spirit. In June 1971, the group returned with not 1 but 2 albums. First came the return of the Magnificent Seven, their second collaborative project with the Four Tops, and their 22nd studio album. Featuring more original songs than their previous effort, the album was met with solid reviews from critics. That same month, they released Touch, their 23rd album, which included the standout track Nathan Jones, along with the title song. The group was not only keeping up with the times, they were helping shape the era's sound. Then, in December 1971, Motown dropped Dynamite, their 24th studio album and their 3rd collaboration with the Four Tops. By this point, the Supremes were recording at a relentless pace, with no signs of stopping. What many fans didn't know was that during this busy stretch, the group had recorded an entire additional album in 1971 titled Promises Kept. It featured 19 tracks, but for reasons still unclear, Motown shelved it. True to the title, those promises were never kept. Instead, Motown paired the group with Smokey Robinson for a new project. The result was Floyd Joy, released in May 1972 as their 25th studio album. It was the only Supremes album produced and arranged entirely by Robinson himself, and included hits like Automatically Sunshine, Your Wonderful Sweet Sweet Love, and the title track. The group's lineup, however, continued to shift. Just a month after Floyd Joy came out, Cindy Birdsong left the group after learning she was pregnant. She was replaced by Linda Lawrence, a talented vocalist who had previously sung backup for Stevie Wonder. In a twist that almost seemed scripted, Lawrence also became pregnant shortly after joining, and by October 1973, Birdsong returned to take her place. Motown kept the music coming. In November 1972, they released The Supremes, produced and arranged by Jimmy Webb, their 26th studio album. As the name suggests, it was a full collaboration with the acclaimed songwriter and producer. The album included I Guess I'll Miss the Man, and by this point, Jean Terrell had truly stepped into her own as lead vocalist. But the hits had slowed down. Even a contribution from Stevie Wonder, a funky, forward-thinking track called Bad Weather, failed to ignite the charts. Disheartened, Terrell eventually left the group. She was replaced by Sherry Payne, often described as the little lady with the big voice. Petite in stature but powerful on stage, Payne brought new energy to the lineup. Still, by 1974, reporters continued asking about Diana Ross in nearly every interview, despite the fact that she had left the group 4 years earlier. In May 1975, Motown finally released a self-titled album, The Supremes. It marked their 27th studio release and leaned into the growing disco wave with tracks like He's My Man. Then, in February 1976, Birdsong left the group once more, this time for good. She was replaced by Susie Green, another alum of Stevie Wonder's backing band, Wonder Love. With Green on board, the group released High Energy in April 1976, their 28th album. Full of disco-fueled tracks, it became their highest-charting album of the decade and delivered one final top 40 pop hit, I'm Gonna Let My Heart Do the Walking. In October 1976, Motown released what would be the Supremes' 29th and final studio album, Mary, Sherry, and Susie. Named after the group's final lineup, Mary Wilson, Sherry Payne, and Susie Green, the album aimed to close out a long chapter with a fresh spin. But it fell flat. Critics panned it, audiences didn't respond, and the album failed to make an impact. Just 2 months later, Mary Wilson, the group's last original member, decided to walk away. Motown briefly brought in a replacement, Karen Jackson, but the momentum was gone. By July 1977, the Supremes were no more. Their final performance took place on June 12, 1977, at London's Drury Lane Theatre, marking the end of an era. After the group disbanded, many former members continued singing in various capacities. Of course, Diana Ross went on to become an international icon, releasing chart-topping hits, starring in films, and becoming a household name across generations. Meanwhile, the Supremes' legacy lived on through dozens of compilation albums and live recordings that kept their music in circulation. On March 25, 1983, Ross reunited briefly with Mary Wilson and Cindy Birdsong for Motown's 25th anniversary TV special, a fleeting but powerful moment. In 1986, former members Jean Terrell, Sherry Payne, and Linda Lawrence began performing under the name The Former Ladies of the Supremes. Over time, other alumni, including Susie Green, rotated through the lineup, keeping the music alive for longtime fans. In 1988, the Supremes were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. However, Diana Ross did not attend, reportedly due to lingering tensions with other members. At the time, Mary Wilson's memoirs, which offered a behind-the-scenes look at the group's history, were said to have widened that rift. In 2000, a much-hyped reunion tour fell apart before it began. Wilson backed out after discovering Ross was set to earn significantly more than her and Birdsong. The dream reunion never materialized. Yet despite internal conflicts and shifting lineups, the Supremes remain one of the most influential and successful girl groups in music history. They charted a staggering 33 singles on the Billboard Top 40, with 12 reaching #1, more than any other American group on the Hot 100. In 2017, Billboard magazine ranked the Supremes #1 on its list of the greatest girl groups of all time. As for total sales, the numbers vary. Estimates range from 50 to 100 million records sold, but according to Insider.com, they are considered the best-selling vocal group of all time. Their sound became the heartbeat of Motown in the 1960s, and their influence helped the label break barriers and reach audiences across the globe. Even today, their music continues to inspire and endure. The Supremes then and now. Where are the members today? They were once the crown jewels of Motown, the most successful girl group in American music history. But what happened to the women behind the glamour, the hits, and the legendary harmonies of the Supremes? Diana Ross. Born March 26, 1944, Diana Ross rose to fame as the iconic lead singer of the Supremes, guiding the group to international superstardom throughout the 1960s. When she left the group in 1970, she wasted no time launching what would become one of the most successful solo careers in entertainment history. Ross went on to release 25 studio albums, countless singles and compilations, and has sold over 100 million records worldwide. She also found success on the big screen, earning an Academy Award nomination for her portrayal of Billie Holiday in Lady Sings the Blues, 1972, and starring in Mahogany, 1975, The Wiz, 1978, and the TV drama Out of Darkness, 1994. Even decades later, Ross never slowed down. She released her 25th studio album, Thank You, in November 2021, her first original material in over 20 years. On June 10, 2022, she kicked off the UK leg of her Thank You tour at Cardiff Castle, and just weeks later, she lit up the Pyramid stage at Glastonbury Festival. As of now, Diana Ross is 81 years old and still a global icon. Mary Wilson. Mary Wilson, born March 6, 1944, was a founding member of the Supremes and the heart of the group's enduring legacy. After her departure in 1977, she continued performing and turned to musical theater, appearing in shows like Beehive, Dancing in the Streets, and Supreme Soul. She also became a best-selling author with her 1986 memoir, Dream Girl, My Life as a Supreme, followed by Supreme Faith, Someday We'll Be Together, and Supreme Glamour, 2019, co-written with Mark Vigo. Beyond music, Wilson was a tireless advocate, supporting truth in music advertising laws and working with various charities. She remained active in the Las Vegas performing scene well into her 70s. Tragically, Mary Wilson passed away in her sleep on February 8, 2021, at her home in Henderson, Nevada, from hypertensive atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. She was 76. Florence Ballard. Florence Glenda Ballard, born June 30, 1943, was a founding voice of the Supremes. Known for her rich, soulful vocals, she sang on 16 top 40 hits, including 10 number ones. But after being ousted from the group in 1967, Ballard struggled to rebuild her life and career. A brief attempt at a solo career with ABC Records fizzled out. Behind the scenes, she battled alcoholism, depression, and financial hardship. Despite rumors of a musical comeback, her health declined, and she died of a heart attack in February 1976 at just 32 years old. A tragic end for a once radiant star. Barbara Martin. Barbara Diane Martin Richardson, born June 16, 1943, briefly joined the Supremes in 1960, replacing original member Betty McGlown just before the group signed with Motown. She contributed to early singles and recorded background vocals alongside Ross, Wilson, and Ballard. However, after becoming pregnant in late 1961, she left the group in early 1962. Martin later earned a psychology degree and worked in the mental health field. Out of respect for her former group mates, She rarely spoke about her time with the Supremes, except for a single interview in 2009 for the Meet the Supremes expanded edition. Barbara Martin died in March 2020 at the age of 76. Betty McGlown. Betty McGlown Travis, born June 30th, 1941, was one of the original members of the Primettes, the group that would become the Supremes. She recorded background vocals on Pretty Baby and Tears of Sorrow, the only known recordings that feature her voice. Though all four original members sang live on stage, only Ross, Wilson, and Ballard would go on to record lead vocals in the studio. In 1960, McGlown left the group to focus on her new marriage and was replaced by Barbara Martin. She later lived a quiet life outside the spotlight. Betty McGlown Travis died of diabetes in January 2008 at Beaumont Hospital in Royal Oak, Michigan, at the age of 66. And now that you've seen where the original members of the Supremes ended up, from chart-topping fame to quiet lives out of the spotlight, from tragic losses to lasting legacies, one thing is clear. Their impact on music and culture is timeless. But what do you think? Which member's story moved you the most? And do you believe the Supremes ever truly got the recognition they deserved? As individuals, not just as a group? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this look back, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories about legendary artists who shaped the sound of a generation.